Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I just want you to take a look at the risk disclaimer at the bottom of the stream. Um, those are instructions and guides about how this stream is not financial advice, that trading futures or any other asset is risky. Anything that you see on this stream is considered educational and not financial advice. I also want to note that um, the stream is 10 to 15 seconds variable behind live. So anything that you're watching happen on the stream has already happened in the past. With all of that said, we are here on Friday morning watching the NASDAQ open. If you've watched me trade before, I'm an opening range trader in the sense that I wait for the first 30 minutes before usually taking a trade, unless something highly unusual sticks out to me. So the market has been still pretty volatile, particularly yesterday. Some different headlines surrounding um, conflict in the Middle East, as well as we had some tech earnings this week. We had Intel as well as Google. So that has moved us lower on the week, although the profile itself has turned out to be kind of almost a double distribution, but a lot of volume done in between. So generally just kind of a flat, more D-shaped week. We're trading outside of value now and just above last week's low. They attempted to get last week's low yesterday and also in the overnight session and were unable to do so. Um, as a more zoomed out picture, we didn't have a ton of data this week. We get more data next week. Um, and not only do we get more data next week, but we have FOMC as well as a lot of big tech earnings. I believe that Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, and maybe one other large tech name is reporting. So always take a look at those things. Those are definitely something that can move the market. And I think also something worth thinking about as we go into today's session. So because next week has a lot of data, both from earnings as well as um, other data like FOMC, I would think that not a lot of people want to carry risk, or at least large size risk, going into next week, just with a lot of unknowns about what could move the market around. So with that in mind, I'm not necessarily looking for a directional move. It's not to say that we can't go and take out last week's low if we get some momentum to the downside, but I really, for my own kind of analysis, keep in mind what is coming next week, and that I have a hard time envisioning the NASDAQ getting too extended from this balance area that we've kind of put in with big tech earnings and FOMC on deck next week. So I don't like to make predictions in the sense of like, if we start to go aggressively lower, then I'm going to be looking to get short. But I like to kind of keep that in the back of my head as context for what price might do today, thinking about carrying that into next week. So that's kind of where I'm at today. In the overnight session, we sold off. They tried to get yesterday's low, weren't able to do so, and rallied back up to the Globex high before seeing some exhaustion and rolling back over. And now we're trading just at the edge of value when we look at the entire Globex session. So on the higher time frame, if we decide to go higher, I think the first place to look at for some type of resistance, if we're just going to kind of stay in range, would be this edge of value from this week, which is around 28,785. Like I said, if we roll over, I don't expect a lot of movement or directionality below last week's low if we happen to get there, but definitely worth keeping an eye on. I mean, if we do get there, the sellers have, been able to push it even further outside of the chop zone that we kind of spent quite a few weeks up in. So if they happen to be able to get momentum to the downside and push lower on high volume, that is something worth paying attention to, and probably also like speaks to how the market is feeling about going into a riskier week next week. Um, so as of right now, here 5 minutes in, buyers are pushing up off of this kind of like larger high volume node here just outside of value with a little bit of exhaustion right at the open. That's about all I see. Yesterday was fairly volatile. We had quite a bit of range. The market put in a couple of very strong and very tradable reversals. This one was right off the 8:30 bell. We chopped a whole bunch. This move, I eventually was short here, but I got stopped out. I was shorting around 28,750. And I kept getting into profit and getting stopped out at break even and into profit and staked out. So I finally was a part of this move. I didn't catch all of it because I think by the time it was going, I was a bit frustrated at how many times I'd been stopped out. And I caught a piece of this rally. So this down here at this like 28,500 level that we are rapidly rolling right back over and headed towards is worth paying attention to as this session starts to develop. We have a large imbalance that showed up yesterday right at 28,500, and then a delta zone where sellers got very aggressive in the morning right below it. So market kind of held it twice again in the overnight and then right now at the open. So be interested to see what they do if they get to that level again, which is about where it is on my DOM. Give me just 1 second, guys. I put together this server closet earlier this year just to house computers and stuff, and it has active ventilation, but it's not super happy if the door is closed for too long. So I just noticed that when I was like glancing up and making sure that stream was working, and I was like, oh, that door's closed. It's going to be unhappy. So it was quite a bit of aggression from the sellers there. Got it over this little pivot from right before the open and then kind of just dumped it. And for all that talk about not getting directionality this week, I mean, you do have to give sellers the edge. We were in balance for so long, and they've been the first ones to break it a little bit to the downside from where we were, and they defended it again at around 29,400 when we tried to climb back into that area earlier this week. And now we're sitting outside of this week's value, and we're sitting fairly close to last week's low. So my personal thoughts are that we don't get a ton of directional movement, at least not to the downside this week, but you do have to give sellers the edge and take them very seriously if we start to get below last week's low and start to do any type of volume. Um, that's at some point if we get extended below last week's low, just on a higher time frame, you're gonna start triggering some stops. So I feel like from a zoomed out picture, I have a hard time believing that the market doesn't kind of like drift back into a more um, neutral type waiting position than extending through last week's low and keeping it there. But if they do the latter one, that kind of speaks volumes to me about what the market thinks about um, going into a news heavy and earnings heavy next week. I'm gonna come down and try to test this 28,500 level here. You have some bigger buyers showing up there. There's 22 contracts right at that price, and then 15 to 18 down below. They're going to sweep that. We have a pretty decent taper from the overnight. You have kind of a cluster of imbalances going on here as well. That's what these lines are. That's starting to get a little bit too much for me to see. I'm going to reduce those down. And when I reduce those down, it goes to showing just the strongest ones on the chart. So for now, I'm going to keep it at 2 until we get out of some of this traffic, just so I can kind of see what I'm doing. We're trading through 2 delta zones, both from the overnight session, or maybe one of those is like right at RTH open, but kind of stacked here. So even from an order flow perspective, there's a lot of aggression happening in this area. Um, and they're trying to get it back above 28,500 here and not able to do so yet. Still have about another 20 minutes until the 30-minute opening range is set. And at that point, that's what I'll kind of start to look for some type of an entry, depending on what the market is doing by then. Um, so everybody, some people, when they say trade the open, they literally mean they trade like the opening bell. And I've tried it before. I think lots of people have tried different things about like, what time of day to trade, what session to trade, what asset to trade, all of those things, as they lose the overnight low right there. Um, and for me, the first 5 to 10 minutes especially are just so incredibly fast and a lot of times non-directional, or can be quickly reversed. And so I just like to have some points of reference and kind of like watch for the first 30 minutes to see what the market is actually like what it wants to be doing. Um, like if you had watched the first 5 minutes here, you'd be like, hell yeah, we're going up, right? And got reversed in about a minute and a half. And now we're down here sort of like attempting to get through the previous day's lows. So I just want some points of reference and I want to see what the market wants to do. So there's nothing wrong with trading earlier than, the first 30 minutes. Lots of people do. Um, but for myself, I like points of reference and I find that like I just like the story can change so much in the first 30 minutes, and I want a better idea of what that story is going to be before I start putting risk on. So, like I said, too early for me to take a trade, but if they were to come back up to this 28,500 level, and not be able to get back above it, that would be a place that I would be interested in potentially getting short. You can see that sellers are trying to stack right there as well. And that move looks a little bit news driven. I don't know that it is. I don't have a news feed up, but the way that the DOM is moving there, that and got really really thin, makes me think that maybe there's a headline out that the market is potentially trying to react to. They actually technically touched 500 in that move. I don't know that even the screen recording can pick that up that fast, but we basically like just did this little like flit through 500 and they picked up part of those contracts and then rolled back over. So I'm not 100% sure. If anybody else sees a headline, feel free to throw it in the chat. But when the depth of market starts to look like this, that usually is indicative that there's some type of a headline or somebody is talking that is of importance right now, or at least the market gauges it to be important. If you're a seller here, you want to get a further push through that overnight low, or if they just keep absorbing this, they just poked it a little bit lower. They just went through a little bit of size down there, right at 450. You can see it like barely peeking out of the this tiny little shelf they just made. Which, like, from a seller's perspective, great that you have aggressive sellers pushing that kind of size, but if you don't get momentum and aren't able to break lower, you're going to squeeze back up into, I think, like back above 500 very quickly. Well, this is bouncing around down here near the over or near the previous day's low. I'm just going to take a look at what stocks are moving around this morning, mostly just for whatever the largest holdings are, whatever the big names are doing. Kind of gives an overall picture of how the market is feeling about risk and those types of things. So Intel is down almost 3%, is back below $100 a share. Um, Meta and Amazon are barely down, Nvidia barely down. Everything else is pretty flat. Communication stocks and Disney are the top movers right now. So that's going to be mostly the Dow being supportive, while tech is slightly red and or flat. So I don't really see much going on in that respect. Um, and I don't really have like I have a Thinkorswim watch list on my phone of the S&P's top holdings, and I glance at that just to kind of see like like let's say that um, like when we look right here and we see that the market is trying to sell off, but the only stock that I really see that's has a major impact on the the S&P index, which the Nasdaq, they share a lot of those names. Um, you know, Intel is the only one that is like red. The rest of them are like flattish. So doesn't mean that that can't change, obviously. But I just kind of look at that. If a lot more of the mega cap tech stocks were red, I would be a lot more on guard for a sell off. Um, but right now it's really just Intel. Yeah, there's lost momentum, just a lot of chopping around there, and they're already back up to 500 again. Granted, that's a lot of tests right around that, right around last week's low between today's session and yesterday's session. So eventually they might get through. If I happen to be short going into that level, um, I probably won't be trading multiple contracts here, but if I was, I would be pulling off some risk going into that level, just knowing that it will probably be a violent break if they get it through, and or could be quickly reversed. Yeah, and 500 held perfectly, and they're going to go try to make new lows there. There's that break. Now let's see, do sellers actually have momentum to keep it below the previous day's low? That little bubble there is just indicative that on that really violent push on that last candle, they made the low on negative delta, which is sometimes indicative of a weakening push. So let's look on a higher time frame where we're trading now. They still haven't got it quite through, or they're basically right at last week's low, which is 408.25. So yeah, so they just got it through just now as I switch screens. Now the question is as we're down here, do we start to do any type of meaningful volume? And you'll see I think you'll see some extension just for at least a moment here, um, as we see stops go off from below that swing low from last week. And then the question becomes is how much volume do they do down here, and can they hold it above below the previous day's low on any type of up move? Yeah, so see they're already doing quite a bit of volume right there. You see that little node starting to form. Buyers do not want to let this get too much further here. Starting to extend now through last week's low. So at this point, you got to hand it to the sellers. You know, they're already doing, they've done one spot and now two spots of non-negligible volume, or like attempts at doing volume down here. If I pop back on a few more imbalance levels here, I'll keep it at 3. Those are some nice reference points right there. So they're working on getting it almost 100 points through the previous day's low. So still only about 50 points below the last week's low, but you got a high intensity delta zone happening there at the bottom. So you'll see those popping up at extremes. And then as we've started to consolidate, that zone is going to freeze there as a potential reference point. Notice how similar these moves were. So like when we had this is the open, and so we went up, and then this was you can see just like how few candles it took to bring that down. And then this little pop here was the same thing, just like a quick pop and then violent back down. And then that's what this was as well. Like the first attempt at breaking that low got kind of a reactive pop, and then it was some very aggressive sellers that pushed that back through that low. So that these extensions here are not what I would want to see from the buy crowd. That is unproductive and to me speaks to what the market thinks about going into next week's risk on or more risky uh, news and earnings week. So I wouldn't say that sellers have it in the bag. Never, they never do. Neither side really does, but um, I would have wanted to see a quick sweep of the previous week's low and then a rebid back above if I was going to remain more in the bullish camp. But at this point, I'm probably looking for some type of a reoffer for a short. There's a little bit of exhaustion there at the low just from the consolidation that's happening. You're going to get a quick move up off of that. Now, it was a pretty obvious swing low, like a long wicked candle that they took out there whenever we swept the previous week's low. So there, how much of this is aggressive selling versus how much of it stops. You kind of need both to be able to move. But seeing us trade below this level, um, you know, once there wasn't sort of an automatic rebid or sort of a reactive rebid is not surprising that we got into kind of a world of stops there. But as they start to do more volume and if they start to trade down here, um, kind of the general rule of thumb is that if you're doing volume in the direction that you're moving, the move's probably not completely over yet. So for like comparison, this volume here minus this little like node right here is like pretty thin. So had we done this and then we're going back up, I would say, market's not really interested in going lower. But now we've gone lower and now we're starting to hold down here and we're going to be holding probably pretty close to the low going into setting of the A period, which is the first 30 minutes, which makes me think that sellers might have more in the tank. A little push from the buyers off of this exhaustion here, but then getting a sell imbalance right below that zone. Let me pop one more of these. So the way that ScalperIQ works, you'll see some of these levels like disappear. They're still there. It's just that however many max you're showing on the chart, so I had 3 showing for RTH. So it's showing the top 3 strongest imbalances for the RTH session. So when this one showed up, it was stronger than the one that was here. So it kicked it off of my chart. So if I still want to see it, I can pop it back up to the 4th strongest. So got a rejection right at that zone, and they created a little bit of an imbalance level there. It's a little close to the low for my flavor to take a short position right here as we're about to roll over to 9 a.m. Central and set the 30-minute opening range. But if we extend further and come back to this spot, that would be a place to consider looking for a short trade. I mean, if you've been here for most of the stream, I'm honestly kind of surprised that we're pushing new lows here. So that's the period rollover. You're seeing the volatility pick up a little bit as we roll over to 9 a.m. Central Time here. There's a pop through the low. Did not want to go down there. That's another sell imbalance. Now, if they're able to get above those sell imbalances, sometimes those can act as support from the other side. But wow, and there's another one there. I'm still more interested in a long trade than I am a short trade, but I need to see buyers showing up. I'm going to take a look at some of these imbalances here. Some of them might not be so easy to see because we just traded through them pretty violently. But there's like a negative 72, negative 63, and these are all just relative um, to what size has been done during RTH. Um, and that's what those are flagging there. There's another one down at 40, which is a little bit bigger. This 38 one is negative 180. So they've got some big size sellers trapped here at the moment as they're pushing up off of this level. Remember last week's low is about like 408-ish, I think. Yeah, 408.25. If they want to try to rebid the previous week's low. All right, the first spot that I want to look at is, can they hold 50 to 60-ish on a retest, somewhere in this like 55 area? There's a big buyer at 50. We are moving incredibly fast. So that's back through some of those imbalance levels. Didn't hold the one that I was kind of interested in there yet. That was 57-ish. And once again, very similar to the pops that we've already seen, which is like a quick rally from the buyers and then very aggressive sellers stepping in. I want to see them get this back above 58. But that's not holding very well. See if it holds the bottom of some of those imbalances. Just got it back above 58 there. And back down again. I'm long 58. It might not last very long. Yeah, and you saw some size chasing me down there too. It was quick, like 10, 12 points. I wasn't going to give it very much space because they got that momentum going down. But from an order flow perspective, you were able to get back above 58 a couple of times. And at some point when it's moving that fast, if I want to try a long, like I got to just click it. So small little scalp attempt there. I just think that the risk to reward there is really good. If you're going to come back and touch last week's low, that's already about 50 points from where that entry would be, with some other imbalances here, and they're going to try again. Um, but I might need to let this settle in just a little bit. Um, moving very, very, very fast. Gonna try one more time. They got away from me that time. If you've watched the stream before, I'm somebody that will take tight stops and multiple tries at the same level. So if they try this 58 again, I'm probably going to try it again if they hold it. All right, we're long 58 one more time. Stop is below these imbalances, giving it 20 points, just because we're moving around so fast. First place to look at if I don't get stopped again in like 10 seconds is the previous week's low, which is just above 400. I think buyers have the fuel with these sell imbalances down here, but we're going to need to see some aggression pick up from them and show that they're not going to be able to just get, you know, wrecked on a quick sell move, which is what's happened a couple times here. So stop will go to break even. I'm actually going to put an offer out here for 410 if they happen to punch it through the previous week's low. I'm going to struggle here right below 400. And they got it above and it got immediately rejected. All right, my stop is into profit just for 1 point, canceling my lower stop. All right, we're filled there. That's a scalp off the lows that I liked there. But we've seen some very aggressive back down moves so far, like these kind of violent pop and then violent rollovers. So I want to see the first time that when we pull back that buyers can hold something and we don't just get kind of throttled to the downside. So I don't know that this is exactly like indicative of just order flow trading. I think you could apply this to lots of different types of trading, but I will say that taking multiple tries at the same area um, is something that I see from a lot of order flow traders, and it's something that I have had to add to my kind of like playbook of how I trade futures. Um, the Nasdaq especially is something that just like moves around so fast that um, you need to protect yourself with a stop, and at the same time, um, you know, uh, you need to know that just because like a level doesn't hold the first time, if it's back there again in 10 seconds, like, you know, if your risk to reward there is good, I was risking 20 points there to make, so I think we made 60. So it's 3-1 RR, and I sold actually a little bit early. Um, but I knew I wanted to scalp something off and I didn't want to mess with the previous day's low. So I took it off at the previous week's low. They got it to the previous day's low. You know, my I can't remember who told me this, but the job of a trader is to not capture, every low to every swing high. Your job is to capture a chunk of what's in the middle. Try to manage your risk as you're doing that. So sitting up about not quite 40 points after that scalp because we took a small stop to start with. Now they're fighting with the previous day's low here. It would be very constructive for buyers to get back above that with momentum. At that point, I think your first point of reference is definitely 500, followed by like 525, which is where like a lot of the volume has been centered for the session. Technically, the point of control is all the way up at 651, which is just because there's a really large imbalance there. So there's like one single trade that is moving the actual point of control up that high. But uh, it's kind of the the profile from the overnight is a little bit of a mess. But I would say highest concentration of volume is around 530-ish. And this is the first place that sellers need to defend. And you won't be surprised to hear me say it, but if we come back down and test uh 58 to 60 again, depending on what that looks like, I might just take the same trade again. But if sellers can defend the previous day's low, previous week's low, and start to come back down with some momentum, this is also kind of the first kind of sustained bounce since the open. They don't always get faded, but something to keep in mind as well. So we're pulling back here. The question is can it hold and or do we pull back with just as much violence as we have up to this point? So when we look at like this move here, how aggressive that pullback was, and then there was one right here as well, and there was this one at the open. So if we don't pull back that violently, good news for the buyers probably. If we pull back that violently again and start to trade back down into these imbalances without bouncing, that would not be productive for the buy crowd. Just zooming out a little bit on the overall session helps me to see the profile a little bit. So sellers are doing a meaningful amount of volume below the previous day's low and trading just above the previous week's low right now. So could be some excess um, and could be fuel for a squeeze higher, which is what they're trying to do right now. But the more volume we do down here, the more likely I think it is that we revisit it at some point of the session. So that first trade you saw me take that I got stopped out of basically like 5 seconds after I got into it. I'm not really somebody who uses bracket orders, I guess it could be argued that for that last one, it could have just gone further against me and I wouldn't have stopped out. But I also have a flatten button, and if for some reason I can't seem to get my stop in, um, or price gets away from me, I'll just hammer the flatten button. So I don't like brackets that much, just because my stop is typically going in a specific place, and it's too hard for my brain to kind of calculate, um, like how many points away from my entry is that going to put my stop, and then I have to click a bracket order. For me, I'd rather just click the DOM where I know the imbalances are, or I can see them on the delta vol. So from time to time, I take a slightly larger loss just because if I, hopefully my fill is better than the first time that I tried that. But I do just hit the flatten button if I think price is getting away from me. So once again, aggressive sell move down here. They're going to come back into this 58 level here pretty quickly. So they just traded it and held it again. So this is another one of those very fast sell moves versus how long it took the buyers to kind of grind up through this. So need to see a behavior change from, yeah, from the buyers to be able to finally absorb one of these very aggressive down moves, and they did not do it there at 58. And if you're watching, which I think I always got frustrated at watching live streams and being like, well, you bought 58 the first time and you're not buying 58 again, even though it kind of held for once. And the reality is that, like, yeah, if it had touched that a few more times and we got below and back above a couple of times, I probably would have bought it again. And if they had swept me, they would have swept me again. But um, we held it once, and then on the second try through, it didn't even register that that was an important level. And so now we're trying to get back above it. Um, but now we're kind of reacting to, like, every time you get above 58, now it's trying to sell. So that spot that we were looking at is now sellers are trying to defend it. So for me to get into a position, I need to see like multiple holds, like the sellers, if I'm going long, then sellers really can't get it below whatever my reference point is, which is, we looked at this imbalance and just below this zone. There's a little bit of confluence there. Um, And if it's going to be something that, like, let's say this like spike low, right? Like without a retest, I'm probably just not going to get in. It's going to go without me and I'll look for a different trade. That wasn't a good area for buyers to lose. Now you're sitting below all these imbalances, which gives a place for sellers to defend. Buyers kind of had a bit of fuel there with some pretty strong stacked imbalances, and then they got a push and now giving it all back again. Although I hate it, it's also impossible. It's not, it's very possible for the for us to get down here and just chop, below last week's low and just kind of pulling value down, market kind of considering balance. But sellers still making new lows here, so not making much progress on that particular low, but Sitting right at the opening range low, basically. Back up into these imbalances. Like, to me, the sell imbalances provide fuel if you're above them, but if you're trying to trade up through them, there's a few different points that sellers can try to step in and defend. Back up to this 58 level again. I seem to have picked a price that is going to trade multiple times. So now they're above it, and can they hold it here? Might go without me. One of you just messaged me to say it's choppy. Indeed. This year has been choppy. So I like for buyers that they're back above these imbalance levels. I don't like for buyers how much volume we've done down here hanging out below the previous day's low and the previous week's low. So if they want to recover some of this sell-off, they need to get it out of this area soon, or I think your danger becomes starting to just chop and potentially extend lower. And this is, to me, in my mind, this is already more trading than I would have liked to see below these levels. If I wanted to remain any type of bullish. Not to say that we can't rally from here, but the longer we spend down here, the more chances it gives for sellers to defend. And that's back above the previous week's low. And you kind of saw the difference there for like, in terms of me getting into a position. So like this one here kind of traded around that level multiple times, and this one just went vertical through. So was there an opportunity for me to get long at 58? Probably. Might have had to be a buy stop order. Um, and I'm okay. I'm okay missing it if it just doesn't give me the entry or the kind of price behavior that I want. So I've gotten myself into far more trouble in the past, sort of chasing those moves, like, oh, I want to be long at 58 and thinking that the entry is like the most important part, or like getting in is the most important part rather than the entry price. But 58 with a 20-point stop allows me to put my sell order, just below the lowest in balance. So I give three different places for price for buyers to potentially defend on the way back down. And if I happen to get long at, say, like I chased it and I got filled at like 78, I'm either having to use a much wider stop or my stop is not in the most ideal spot. So I just won't chase it past the price that I want to get in at. They're going to be back at this 58 level again. That time couldn't even get it back above the previous day's low, though. So keeping that in mind if we come back down to this 58 area. The main reason I'm not hunting for a short is one, we're above all of these imbalances here, which I think is providing some of the fuel that is keeping price propped up right now. And because of what I talked about at the beginning of the stream for, I think with what's on deck from a news perspective next week, I just have a hard time seeing the market sell off all day long. But I'm not the one that controls the volume that is enough to move this thing around with my single micro trade. So uh, I will follow where price goes, but seller's going to need to start doing some business lower before I decide to join their team. Just remember that previous week's low is right here, right above 400, like 408. So that the first time they were able to bounce it and get above the previous day's low and the previous week's low, and this time got above the previous week's low and then got rejected right at it just now. Buyers trying very hard to hold this up here. Um, I'll see what it does here at 58, but I don't like this hanging out down here for this long. Seller's starting to defend 400. So we're going to roll over from A period to B period just now. We barely broke the opening range low, so statistically speaking, whichever side, um, whichever side gets outside the opening range first, market tends to like to trend in that direction. Makes sense, really. I don't know that that's the most like useful statistic, overall, but something to keep in mind that, sellers were willing to push through the A period lows. So they got close to, didn't get quite below 60 there, but we're trying to hold this delta zone. I'm going to let this trade here for a minute though, because um, yeah. And the reason wasn't so like, I'm like kind of like letting this trade here now is failure to get back above the previous days and previous week's low there by the buyers. And back above 58 again. I'm gonna let this hang out here for a minute before I consider whether I want to take an entry or not. 58, they're just kind of starting to rotate around it rather than it being a level they actually want to hold. And you're doing a concerning amount of volume down here, which makes me think that they're going to get some type of extension if buyers can't get it up here off of the lows. I want to take a look at, it moved all of my imbalances down to this stacked level. You can see how much traffic is there, but you can also see that this level here provided a pretty perfect short entry if you happen to be sitting there with a limit order. But there's a lot of imbalances happening down here. So just worth noting that there's a lot of size getting thrown around down here, and I am apt to let's figure out who's gonna win this battle, because right now sellers are sending it back towards the lows again. And also just I think this is always a good thing to do is zoom out just a little bit, and you can start to see that we are, yes, violently rotating, about 100 to 110 points at a time here, but also it is super choppy. This is a directional move. This is chop. So when the rotations start to get smaller and smaller and smaller, and we start to trade through, there's multiple points of imbalances here for points of reference. So when it's not so clean, these levels aren't out in space. You're probably going to move the point of control down here fairly soon if we keep trading down here. Um, it just gets to be too much traffic for me to want to take an entry. So starting to trade below all those imbalances now. But this is like above 58 again, or above this is like getting to trade back above this zone and potentially coming back to that imbalance level here at 58, maybe for a long, but sellers might get new lows here. Oh, they tried. Obviously, it takes breakout and like aggressive traders to to move price lower or like to try to break that low. Like obviously some people are selling there. It didn't work that time. And I've tried that. I've tried that type of trading before, for just like pure breakouts of levels like, daily low and stuff. I think it can work if you manage risk really carefully, but I just got so tired of it blowing up in my face. It was just like wasn't a fun time. And like how many times, especially on the NASDAQ, that like, you take the position at like whatever, call it 310 or something like that, and it goes like a few points in your favor and then just like immediately like blows up your stop and then, rolls back over and takes out the low for real. So, you know, I'm sure there's people that do it. I'm sure there's people that are good at it. I'm sure there's people that make money. And good. I appreciate you because when I'm already in a short position, I appreciate you pushing it through the lows. But that will be you doing it and not me. So I got to say, I'm not surprised that we're chopping here. I am a bit surprised that we didn't just sort of like wick the previous week's low and get back up into heavier volume from the overnight session. Um, but it could also be like I'll be streaming here for about another 20 minutes or so. Um, but it could be something that happens later in the session, um, particularly if sellers can't make any, meaningful move lower. Um, Perhaps the other thing that is on the market's mind is we've had some, throughout the week and throughout the last like whatever 2 or 3 months, we've had, news leaking in from the Middle East, and we have seen a lot more military action happening on the weekend. I mean, I think the administration has literally come out and said that they are trying to protect and or stabilize um, markets by doing their military operations during times that the market isn't open. But it also can kind of create an environment where people don't want to hold risk going into the weekend because it's just like some big unknown event. So we could be seeing some of that selling as well. Um, is just people going risk off into the weekend. But with big tech earnings on deck next week, I think that could next week could be the week that sort of like defines whether we're going to go meaningfully lower out of, this horrible chop that we've been a part of for this long. Um, or if we're going to drift back up to, kind of into the 29,600 and potentially 30K area. So I think next week we could get some movement, but as we go into it, I think market's kind of in a holding pattern. Worth noting, I actually hadn't zoomed out far enough, but we're actually challenging monthly lows here, which is like, let me zoom in for reference. You can see the little red line that goes across. It might be too faint to see on stream, but um, that's just where current price is. You can see it moving over on the far right side. So we're basically right in these lows. 227 is that week's low. So breaking new lows here. Oh, and there's a big seller right there at 290. Go take a look at that. Yeah, you can see some size. Two levels there. You'll see that the impact study flagged that as well. You see how much it's hard to see now that that impact level is there, but that's really sticking out far from a volume profile perspective. So somebody really threw some size into the low there. Ooh, looks like they had some more to sell there too. That was like 20 or 30 contracts that popped up at the same level. All right, I want to go see exactly what this low was because I said it out loud and forgot. 227. All right, I'm going to scroll my DOM down to 227. I don't know that they're going to get it there, but if we're going to sweep yet another weekly low, I want to see if price can hold that. Now they might just not get anywhere near me, but so they have that big sell delta right there that we just looked at, and now they're not able to get price back above it yet. I'm gonna pop back up here and see. So now they're above it, or attempting to get above it. Sellers willing to step in and defend that level. I will scroll my DOM down to the 230-ish level if we start trading closer to it. But this 290 level is a little bit interesting to me, just because it sticks out like a sore thumb. But sellers have defended it a couple times. Every touch off that level is getting sold right now. So somebody had some size to throw and some size to defend it as it comes back up. So buyer's trying real hard here. They got it above that time, but not holding it cleanly. Because like market's going to try to get through as many reference levels as they can. So if they get through, they're able to sweep these June 8th, June 7th, 8th weekly lows here. Remember, there's two of them. So they're like, this one here is at 65 and the other one's at 27. So they swept the 65 one by just a handful of points and didn't get close to the 27 one. And we got a buy imbalance there at 82 and you're going to pop off of that. I gotta say, that's a potential long there at 290. I don't love what this is doing. And they defended just below the opening range low there. Now back below 290 again, yeah. There's another big seller there. So it's pretty unusual to see this level of, we saw a bunch of stacked imbalances all in one area up here, and pretty unusual to see them stacked this close together again. Um, so just noting that that's not typically what I see from the impact study. So the market is really throwing around some size in both directions down here. It would be very NASDAQ for this to sweep that weekly low, just get everybody's stops before pushing back up. And once again, that's not what you want to see for the buyers, is like a ton of volume being done, like building another high volume node already down here at 280, the very edge of the range. Got a little bit of a taper, but I would say seller's pretty firmly in control right now. We're also trading incredibly fast. Somebody's going to try to somebody wanted to buy right around the level that I was looking at there. Let me let them get filled and see how that goes. And they pulled that order. I'm always like, did they pull the order and then just market themselves in, or did they literally just decide they didn't want to get long there anymore? Guess that was a pretty good move to not get long there by them. I'm kind of sitting on hands. This is just trading a million miles an hour and throwing around a ton of size. So sellers have the ball right now. But for all the reasons I've talked about, I'm gonna have a hard time joining in, going into yet another weekly low. Also, like when we're selling like this aggressively, we're seeing like stacked imbalances down here like this. Like sellers better be confident they can get this lower, otherwise they're just going to be sitting on a bomb. Big seller there at 295. And they took it all. That'll probably be another buy imbalance would be my guess. Yep. And that's an aggressive flip from sellers to buyers there. Let's see if they come back down and test that level, or if they're just going to go. I need a retest to be able to get in if they're just going to go vertical, which they have some fuel down here from some of these large sell orders. If they want to push it, they're already back into the opening range. I'm just going to let them push it. And that feels very squeezy to me. It's like basically just vertical without any pullbacks. Not the easiest session so far. Choppy, and then also a couple of violent reversals in both directions. Now just trading back into traffic. It looks like 28,350 might become the point of control here soon. But kind of a really messy profile. Like if I compress this even more, it's like high volume node, high volume node, high volume node, high volume node. Um, so not ultra helpful from that perspective. I'm interested to see if it comes back to this 290 to 295 level where these big orders took place, if it can hold, but I don't know if I want to see it come down quite that aggressively. This is coming back down to test the opening range low. And that's just kind of, that's a sort of like market reference level. I don't think I see anything there from like a delta perspective or like order flow perspective, but it's a point of reference the market's going to use on some type of a pullback. A lot of traders use the opening range. The 30-minute opening range is pretty popular, so it's another reason I put them on my chart is if we're all looking at the same levels, then, hopefully you're able to find some reaction points in there. So I feel like we've looked at some good levels this morning. I mean, this 58 level ended up, or sorry, this 90 level was good, and the 58 level provided support a couple of times. But there's also just been some vertical moves through um, through the levels that I was looking at, and I'm not, especially in this environment when we're throwing around so much size and moving around so fast, like the only way to be able to catch those on the NASDAQ is to put in a buy stop order, which you can do that. And it's probably liquid enough if you're trading micros that you'll get maybe only 1 or 2 points of slippage. But it's just not how I like to trade. And I want to be able to see a level hold and be able to get an entry. And I'm just okay with it if it decides to go without me. I'll look for something else. So got rejected in this delta zone here, but we've moved our point of control up to 28,350. That's why you've seen the volume profile shift colors as we got like 70% of volume has been done in this area now that we've traded down here for long enough. So this is actually coming up to that 58 level that I got long off of earlier. But we once again just kind of went vertically through it. We kind of like touched the bottom of it a couple times. Buyer's getting a decent extension here. Just going to watch 58 on the way back down. I don't know that I'm going to trade it. Also don't love that the point of control is sitting right below there at 50. There's a squeeze. That's right back to the previous week's low. See if buyers can take out the top of one of these rotations. They're going to try. There's one. The next one is at 25. There's a nice trade-off of these imbalances and this delta flip down here. It was too fast and trading back through too many other imbalance areas and just like a bunch of volume for me to sort of like aggressively chase that. But if you did, nice work. I would be taking some profits here if you have multiple contracts. If we look at a higher time frame on that move, let's scoot back over to this week. You know, didn't turn out to kind of be a wick on an hourly candle. Like we traded down here long enough to put in a fully closed, pretty bearish looking hourly candle. So doesn't look as nice as something like this kind of pin bar from last week. But looking at the previous day's low, here's what buyers are going to try to get this back above. And that's over another pivot there and back above the previous day's low. Buyers really pushing here. Yeah, there's a squeeze. See that delta zone follow up as we hit extremes there. It's a nice move off the lows. You know, when we get through when we make new lows like this, right? So like here's one test, two tests, three tests. On the third test, they broke it. But really, you only got about 40 to 50 points below this level that they had already tested once here at 300. You know, so we got about 40 points there and then just started to go sideways with a whole bunch of aggressive sellers and sell imbalances there. So that very much provided fuel for the squeeze. It's like if you think about a bunch of people piling in short here, and then we only get 30 to 40 points of directionality. There's a little bit of exhaustion from the buy crowd there, just as we cool off from that upper move. Buyer's still super aggressive there. Take a look at this level. We're just right above this pivot here. Pretty good rally going on there. Some weakness on that push. I'm looking at weakness on that push higher and above this swing high from like 915, as well as some exhaustion and this high intensity delta zone. Looks like a place we could pull back from, which I kind of wanted an entry closer to 450 there, and that seems to be the rhythm of the day as they just keep knifing the levels that I'm looking at. I'll still see what 450 does. 450 is like the bottom of this zone and just above where we flagged some exhaustion happening in here. I just want to see what it does when it gets to that level. But that might have already been the scalp that I wanted there. So we have this kind of like secondary point of control here for this week, which is like sitting at like 28, call it 590, 600-ish. So if the market gets momentum, that's up into like the opening range high. But thus far, we haven't seen one of these rallies not have a very aggressive move back to the downside. And got that one nice scalp to start, and then all of my reference levels, the market can hear me talking and just decided to run without me. So it's coming back and testing the previous week's low there at like 407. This is a spot that buyers want to hold. Previous week's low, and a retest from above. It's like 407-ish. See what they can do here. Yeah, they're trying to hold it right now. Nope. Back above it again. Yeah, it's not a clean hold of that level at all. And come back down to this zone. Might look at our 58 area again, but getting pretty close to the end of when I like to start putting on trades. It is moving around a lot. Um, really annoyed they didn't give me another look at shorting 450, but such as it is. All right, guys, I think I'm going to wrap it there. It is really choppy. There's definitely been some tradable moves in there. I think it's just going to get more choppy throughout the session. Keep in mind all of the events that are taking place next week as you get later into the session. I think the market um, probably is likely to want to try to balance, in my opinion, going into next week. Um, so, uh, keep that in mind as you get later into the session on Friday about what's coming next week and, potential Middle East conflict stuff that has been happening over the weekend as well. Good luck to you for the rest of you that are still trading the session. We'll be back again next week, streaming on Wednesday. I believe that's FOMC. So we're internally kind of like debating. We'll be there for the morning session, and then we might go live for the actual announcement itself. I won't be trading that because I think it's gambling to trade during FOMC. I think it's more for entertainment value than it is for actual taking trades, but it can be interesting to see what happens in from an order flow perspective. So if we hear some of you wanting us to jump on stream for that, we'll see if we can make an exception to do an afternoon stream just to watch like the first 20 to 30 minutes of the market trading after the announcement. I think that's it for now. Everybody enjoy their weekend. Our Discord is free to join. There's a link in the description. Come say hi. If you like some of the tools that you're seeing here, we have free trials available to try out our tools and see the different things that we have going on there. So cheers, everyone. Enjoy their weekend.